Hello and welcome to Lunch with Sibos with me, Nadine Dereza.
And with me, Chia. We have a full program of interviews and discussions for the next hour.
Yes, it's action-packed. In the Sibos Game Changer interview, Dr. Michele Mosca talks about the security threat quantum computing poses to financial institutions.
And the team behind smartpayments.com, a new website designed to provide guidance and advice to corporates on all their payment matters, will be joining us as well.
And we'll have a panel session on one of the biggest themes of the conference. What am I talking about?
Yep.
Global payments innovation.
But first, the disruption that is happening in global finance is not being driven by fintechs alone.
There are macro trends behind the disruption, and it's creating some really big opportunities for some banks.
To explain more, we are delighted to be joined by Ather Williams, Head of Business Banking at Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. Ather, welcome. Good to see you again.
Thank you. Nice to see you as well.
Good to see you. And I know you were recently appointed lead for business banking. Can you tell us how that role intersects with your previous position when you were leading transaction services at the bank?
Absolutely. So the way Bank of America has organized itself is we are structured on 8 lines of business, covering the largest corporations through individuals. Business banking is one of those lines that focuses on companies between $5 and $50 million in sales. And we deliver the full suite of products to the bank. So whether it's individual wealth management, transaction banking, lending, equipment finance, or even in some cases investment banking to that set of clients. And so I actually have the great pleasure to continue to work with the transaction banking team to deliver those services to my new set of clients, as well as kind of focus on delivering a broader set of capabilities that the bank has to offer.
It's a busy role. When I look at your CV, you've got a huge amount on your plate.
Well, that's the way it works.
Yeah.
We spoke about 2 years ago in Singapore. That was about disruptive technologies.
Yes.
And a lot of talk about blockchain as well. And, time has passed. A lot has changed since then. What would you say are the big differences?
Well, I think when we were talking 2 years ago, I think people were still sort of circling the wagons around two things. One is blockchain and the companies in which that are pushing the protocol is going to be a complete disruptor and or replace the banks in terms of infrastructure? And quite honestly, there was a discussion about how they were going to compete with SWIFT as well. I think since that conversation, we've moved to a place where banks are now both investing in and trying blockchain as a way to replace legacy infrastructure we have, and also try to reimagine how we do global payments. Because the cross-border flows, given some of the macro trends, are pretty interesting and sticky.
And as a result of that, is the structure of the relationship between banks and corporates changing as a result?
It's a great question. So earlier in the year, we had about 15 of our best clients, our largest MNCs, together in San Francisco for sort of a full-day working session to understand from them how they see the world given the advance of technology and impact on their companies, as well as the broader ecosystem, because they're all global companies. And many of them are these, what I would call the new age digital companies that are born globally. So, you all of a sudden, if you have a digital product or capability or you're working on a network model, you're instantly in 80 countries around the world, and now how do you operate? And they're looking at us saying, look, the complexity of that world is more than we want to manage. So how can you, Bank of America, Merrill Lynch, organize that ecosystem for us and make it simple? We want to think about, we don't want to manage what legacy large companies do and have 3,000 bank accounts with all these banks around the world. We want to have one with you and help you manage it. And we understand you as a counterparty, and then help us distribute those capabilities and sort of organize the ecosystem. So that's kind of the way we're sort of thinking about how do we then create ourselves as a middle platform and partner with the rest of the industry to deliver services to our clients.
And that's increasingly challenging because there are more fintechs coming on board with different ideas, different ways of doing things, new options, new opportunities. So again, a plethora of different options available to your clients. So how are you managing that? How are you trying to bridge that divide for them?
So there's a couple things. So one, I think the first challenge is connectivity. So how do you connect into the legacy infrastructure as well as these myriad of fintechs that you mentioned who have different opportunities and bring those to bear? So the API sort of construct has been really formative for us. There's a really rethinking how we connect and creating an API strategy across the bank that hits all of our data stores. Because you can imagine being a bank that operates in over 60 countries around the world, you've got a data store in every country. And then by products are siloed, and then but businesses are siloed. So how do you net that together internally and then enable it to link it into other companies? So that's kind of step one. Step two is really then thinking about our model for how we filter those clients. So if you think about if you were to have your mobile phone, whether it's a Google or an Android or an iPhone, there's an app store. right? And there's a process they use to sort of whittle down what's best in breed capabilities they're going to build and which ones they're going to allow third parties to develop. We do something very similar. So we're very focused on having an innovation funnel where we can help understand what problems our clients are trying to solve. What are the best in breed solutions out there? Are they safe? Are they efficient? Are they cost effective? Do they integrate well? And then filter those in so allow those we enable our clients to access those through our platforms.
Now, we talked about disruption at the top of the piece. It's not just coming from fintechs, but it's macro trends. So when we talk about macro trends, they differ depending on who you speak to, but what are the key macro trends that you've identified?
So I think there are several, but I'll really focus on two. One is the increasing tide of nationalism, right? So as I think about it, it started a couple of years ago with the Brexit vote. And then you had the elections in the United States, and you've seen elections in Italy and France and other places across Europe, that people become very, very provincial. And because they've been almost, globalization has become a dirty word in some case. And so people are putting up trade barriers, they're looking at taxation and tariffs. Also, because of cybersecurity and personal data laws, people want to control their citizens' data, there's a lot of rules been put in place around what can be where and how it operates. So things that normally be federated across markets now has to be onshore, secured this way in this format, and it's different by country. So that creates a lot of friction for corporates. It's a very difficult model to manage. And so that's one major trend that's really sort of making global commerce different. The other implication of that is that if you're a company and you're manufacturing, you used to manufacture centrally and distribute globally, now that equation starts to change because maybe you should actually be manufacturing locally, which creates a whole different complexity. Back to the point about bank relationships. Now you have to have in each country in which you operate a different banking relationship. That's a different challenge. That's kind of one. The other one I would say is traditionally, businesses thought about three business models, right? So you manufacture something physical, car, desks, chairs, TV cameras. You had software to enable something to happen, or you had intellectual property, like consulting. It was in ideas and people. We now have this fourth, which is a network business model, which is really changing the game for lots of things. So you can have the lodging industry now be dominated by Airbnb that owns no assets. Or you can think about the growth of Amazon, where they've gone from owning their inventory in books in a few categories to now organizing an ecosystem of marketplace sellers, and now they're reverse integrating to buying Whole Foods and having their own stores and creating a whole network they can bring together. It's a similar model that works for Google or Facebook or LinkedIn. How do you do that? And so now companies are all thinking about, all right, now what's our network? And how do we capture that value of our clients or suppliers? And so as banks, we're thinking about how do we help them manage that, given that we have many overlaps.
And something you call network value, isn't
Yes.
it? Something you refer to. And we sort of alluded to it, but digitization has obviously been a major force in business for decades. So what impact is that having in 2017?
So I think it's having a couple. First, it's requiring all the banks to really step back and think about our infrastructure. I mentioned the myriad data stores we have. In order for, the term that was used in a session earlier was data is the oil that lubricates sort of the system. So being able to extract that oil is not easy when you have our infrastructure that's 40 years old in some cases. And so a lot of investments gone in 2017 into accessing the data. And then obviously, given some of the high profile data breaches, how do you secure it? That's kind of step two. And then lastly, we're thinking about, all right, how do you think about some of the new trends in machine learning or artificial intelligence to create and manage these big data sets and create insights? And so those insights are the things that all of our clients really want. Right now they get them from a person. We send a banker to sit down with them and look at all these variables and do that. But how can you take even more information, synthesize it, and push that out to your clients? And that's sort of where we're moving to in 2017 and 2018.
What are some of the big challenges there? Because with AI, again, a lot of different options become available, and cybersecurity becomes another increased risk. How are you helping your clients navigate through these waters?
So I think those different issues slightly differently. So I think that cyber is the biggest issue, and I think that's the one where you have to solve that one first before you can even have a dialogue with your client about how you can leverage big data, because they don't want to commingle their data because they're concerned about it. So between education on their side about basic things like passwords and access and permissioning is kind of key, and then secondarily it's around I'll call it what our global information services team does and our security team does, which is really think about the ways in which you can put protections around data and know when things are breached. And quite honestly, as you've seen more recently with some of the high profile ones, it's just constant vigilance, right? So that's kind of step one. From AI perspective, I think it's about plug and play right now. And I think for us, it's about being able to test and learn And if you're going to fail fast, fail cheaply, learn something and move on, but do it constantly, because to your point, every day there's a new algorithm or a new company, and you can't kind of rest. You just have to keep kind of constantly churning. So having a process to do that is critical. Just
a quick word on hyper competition. Is that affecting you, the banking industry, as it is with other industries?
Oh, it absolutely is. So I've seen graphics, and we've drawn some charts ourselves, where you look at the unbundling of banking. So traditionally, a bank did everything itself. And now you can see there's a very myriad of fintechs are attacking each layer of the banking stack. So whether it's the data layer, it's lending, it's deposits, it's capital markets assets, it's information, it's quantity client access. You all have a new set of competitors on each piece. And so you kind of makes you step back and reassess where your value is being created. What do you really do? I mean, as a bank, what do? We are the custodian of people's assets, right? So whether it's cash or other securities, we lend money off that. We provide risk management solutions, provide access to capital. Those things are always going to be part of the banks, are always going to be regulated, and that's sort of, I think about it. But then, all right, now how do you allow them to do those other things? That's changing pretty rapidly and pretty dynamically. And so you can either hold to the old model, or you can embrace the new and think about how you find partners that are best in breed in each of those layers of the stack and work with them to create a new solution for the client.
I suppose, how are you embracing this new model where you are working with fintechs? Are you embracing it? Are they becoming part of your environment?
They are. So within transaction banking, I actually established an innovation team. And that team is focused on creating that innovation funnel and thinking about the problems we're trying to solve, prioritizing them, and then finding the best of breed partners, and then creating proofs of concept and running them through to production. And then out of that comes either new products. We launched one recently called Intelligent Receivables that takes AI and overlays it on top of traditional lockbox technology, so that we can take people's straight-through processing rates of paper payments and electronic payments from about 15% on average to about 95%. So that's a kind of I'll call it a basic innovation. We've also partnered with people in the payment space. So we did some high-profile deals that are public with Earthport a few years ago, with a company called Moto Payments more recently, that really help us sort of think about how we can do things differently and leverage their capabilities versus having to do everything ourselves.
Is disruption going to be a sort of a evolving, continuous battle on a day-to-day basis? Is the industry able to keep pace with that?
So I think it's going to be, candidly, I think that there's going to be a shakeout at some point, because the capital intensity and the wherewithal to continue to think about doing this only the largest institutions really have that sort of, can sustain that pace. When I think about how much money we spend on technology every year, or just on headcount every year, to focus on these things, I think that the core for the banks is disruption needs to be a way of life. And I think about some of the stories you have coming out of Apple, for example, when Steve Jobs was thinking about creating the iPhone, and the iPod team was upset because it was going to cannibalize their product, and there was that famous back and forth about, well, if you don't do it, someone else will. And I think that's the same place we have to be in banking. We have to think about it. It's going to change. It is already changing. And so just decide you're going to find the better way for your clients or our clients now, and take charge of it versus letting it happen to you. And so that's where we have to kind of change the mindset. And disruption is just going to be part of, we should be constantly thinking about how can I do that better, faster, cheaper, and in the interest of the client.
Well, it's been fascinating talking to you, and I suppose a great opportunity to rethink banks' value to their clients.
That's a good point, because if you don't do it, someone else will.
Yeah, indeed. A pleasure as ever. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
And now it's time for the Sibos Game Changer, our series of interviews with thought leaders and influencers from the world of finance and beyond.
Well, earlier I had a chat with Dr. Michele Moscow, one of the world's leading experts on quantum computing and its security threat to financial institutions. I began by asking him, what exactly is quantum computing?
Well, quantum computing is the new kind of computing you get when you take advantage of the quantum computing paradigm for physics. So it's not a new algorithm, it's not just a new architecture or new material, it's much more fundamental than all of that. So you're capturing something so fundamental that the implications naturally are going to be much more profound and far-reaching.
So when we talk about quantum computers, what will they be able to do that today's computers can't do?
So, I mean, what this new paradigm implies is that the bit, so deep under the hood of our computers, there's these bits, zeros and ones. They don't, in a quantum paradigm, they don't need to be 0 or 1. Mm-hmm. They can somehow embody all the 0 and 1 configurations at the same time and perform computation. So because they can explore astronomically many configurations at the same time, whatever that means, they can for very specific sets of problems, get to the answer astronomically quicker.
Right.
So they'll help us design new materials and new drugs and so on and so on. However, the shadow side is they'll also break the cryptographic foundations of our cybersecurity systems.
Okay, so they can do a lot of good stuff faster, but at the same time, a lot of bad stuff.
Well, there's this one really bad thing. It's you know, you could say, well, it's just breaking a few codes.
Yeah.
However, these happen to be the codes our entire ICT infrastructure rely on.
So that's going to be a big dent in cybersecurity.
It's beyond a dent, right? It's a crumbling of the foundations.
So if there are only a handful of quantum computing research institutes around the world, where's that threat coming from?
So the handful is growing, and these are the top research institutes in the world. And we're also seeing a growing number of industry players getting involved. IBM, Google, Microsoft is supporting a number of these groups. Intel just announced it's working, and there's other, of course, military contractors likely working in this space. China just announced multi-billion-dollar investment. So there's a lot of main players, and they're ultimately, the end game is all these positive applications we mentioned, right? So everybody wants to get their money back and make a profit and be home to Quantum Valley and reap the economic prosperity associated with quantum computers, which means you have to give customers access to it. So in addition to state actors having access to it, and that of course is a real concern for cybersecurity, you'll also have the first generation users of quantum computers getting access, which means cyber criminals will inevitably get access as well. And with the internet and cloud computing and so on, I wouldn't expect a huge time lag between legitimate, parties getting access for good applications and cyber criminals getting access. Okay,
so on a timeline, I mean, how soon before we see it? Not the cybersecurity aspect, but even the good stuff coming to fore.
I say there's a 1 in 6 chance that within a decade we'll have a large enough computer to crumble, RSA cryptography as we currently use it. So 1 in 6 chance within a decade, and even chance, 50-50 odds in less than 15 years. And you can already start doing useful things several years before that. So I think it's under 10 years that we'll see very useful, potentially see, again 1 in 6, but 1 in 2 chance on the order of 10 to 15 years, we'll see industrially useful applications. And shortly after that, the cryptanalytic threat will become a reality as well.
So you said we can do useful things right now.
Well, in closer to 10 years. It'll still take a few years before they'll get, once you have on the order of 100 what we call logical quantum bits, we see some useful applications. Right? And as we get to 1,000 and 10,000, then there'll be many more, but then we'll also see the cryptanalytic applications as well.
Is there anything we can be doing or starting to do to prepare ourselves for this?
Absolutely. I mean, there's 2 things that banks and everyone else need to do. First of all, there's this brick, this fundamental building block of cybersecurity that needs to be redesigned. And this can take easily 10 to 15 years to do properly. Then there's all the systems that use these bricks, these building blocks. And we don't need to do this serially. We don't need to invent the brick and then say, here you go, and then embark on another 10 to 15 year roadmap to use the brick. We can pretty much start assessing our vulnerabilities, coming up with our roadmaps, working backwards and seeing what do we need to do. Apart from having the brick available, what else needs to be done in terms of regulation, oversight, validation, standards. There's a lot we can do to start preparing, and then when the new cryptographic primitives are available, we'll be able to very quickly integrate it into our systems. So as an example, history has shown us we should absolutely not bake in one cryptographic algorithm into the code and make it really, really hard and expensive to change it. So we want to design new agile cyber systems where we can upgrade to a new crypto primitive very quickly.
So it sounds like the infrastructure is almost different in terms of if I'm building something now, I need to bear in mind that there may be other options coming into play, and how I structure it will be different to allow for these, antidotes in a way to fit in.
I mean, we're used to modular design and so on, and this is just one piece we need to keep modular and not take for granted, and not just bake in what everyone else happens to be using. We need to design the next generation infrastructures to be able to adopt this new crypto. And it doesn't need to be a disruptive thing. Just make it part of your regular, cybersecurity, your cyber, ICT lifecycle, your software and hardware upgrade lifecycle. So, and decide when you want to upgrade to quantum-resistant technology, have that discussion with your vendors, and this will be a natural evolution that is neither disruptive nor more expensive than what you would have done anyway.
So you're saying work it into your systems now.
Right,
Don't
right.
treat it as a separate entity that you later want to plug in.
Yeah.
So it's evolving together with your security system.
Right.
But is that an effective cost-wise in terms of, because I'm putting money in?
It's by far the cheapest way to do it. Because this is not like a gamble, an insurance where you buy it, but you know you're probably not going to use it. You know ultimately we're going to have to upgrade to quantum-resistant crypto. So it's a cost we have to incur. And by doing it methodically and in a disciplined way early on, it will be the cheapest it could possibly be. Look, if you wait, and you wait till it's just blatantly obvious that you desperately need this, it'll be very disruptive. Your existing plans will have to get disrupted. Your best people will have to be called off whatever they're doing now to put out this raging fire that is about to arrive. So it'll be very expensive, disruptive, and in addition to ultimately, not everyone will do it in time, and so confidential information will get compromised, some systems will collapse. When you rush the construction of your foundations, right, if you don't let the cement cure properly, you're going to have very fractured and flawed foundations. Right? And that will be very fertile ground for hackers for many, many years to come.
But one could argue that with technology moving so quickly, I might be able to leapfrog and skip a few stages in between.
In what sense do you mean?
Well, I mean, things will change and there may be other technologies developed to allow me to create these cybersecurity programs without having to go through the foundation of building that infrastructure.
No, you can't. I mean, the only way we can do computation and communication through untrusted infrastructure is by using cryptography. So there's no way to, you can't get around this.
Okay.
I mean, you can get around one particular tool or system or another, but you can't get around having new crypto at the foundation of these new ICT tools.
So what then is the biggest obstacle right now?
Well, there's three kinds of obstacles, and they're all big. There's the technological obstacles, like we really do have to scrutinize these new cryptographic primitives and make sure they actually are resilient to quantum attacks. But that's not the hardest one. There's just the obvious, business obstacle in that, as you alluded to earlier, there's so many urgent matters where if I don't act now, the consequences are immediate. And now here's another problem where logically I understand if I don't act now, in 10 years, there will be catastrophic consequences. Nothing actually happens in the next 6 months, right? So there's a natural human tendency to put it off. So we do need, and this is emerging, we do need boards of directors and the leadership to start asking their teams, multi-departmental teams, to come up with a plan and implement it. It doesn't require a lot of resources right now, but you do need somebody in charge and with the executive support to design and implement this strategy for the organization. And the third obstacle is the regulatory regime needed to ultimately drive the necessary steps. With any sort of safety and security issues and technology, ultimately there has to be some sort. The main driver in the long run is the requirement that you must be safe against these kinds of threats.
So do banks understand that, and as well as regulators, do they understand that need right now?
I believe they understand it.
But are they acting on it?
Certainly the first steps I see are starting. For example, I was invited to speak at SWIFT, and if you look around the world, what are banks doing? In Asia for a number of years, in Europe actually, initially they've been using quantum cryptography to secure certain backup links. So it's just one niche, but they're getting familiar with the technology and the problem set. In Asia and China in particular, there's a big push for quantum cryptography in the banking sector. And in North America, Bob Blakely yesterday from Citigroup, we sit on a committee, of the National Academy of Sciences in the United States, which is looking at quantum computing and its impact on cybersecurity. He's also putting together a working group through FSISAC to study this problem. RBC is funding one of our training programs for training university level training in this space. So starting to create the intellectual, the talent pool to deal with it, and starting the planning and the collaborative effort that will be needed to make this happen. So I see all the signs of the right steps happening right now.
One last question, is collaboration going to be key in all of this, or can they go it alone?
Absolutely. I mean, we all have a shared cyber infrastructure, and cryptography is a very, very common building block. It's just a common language for the entire, global ICT system. So we do have to collaborate, industry with governments and with regulators to make sure all the pieces converge at the same time and in time to make sure we're protected against this threat.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that.
It's been a pleasure.
Wow, just shows you how fascinating that subject is. And I thought the world was fast, but I feel that's even faster now.
And it's going to be even faster. You can hear more from Michele when he speaks about the quantum threat to financial services, including its possible impact on blockchain at the Swift Institute tomorrow at 9 a.m.
Now, if you're wondering what to do tonight, here's a reminder of some of the restaurants to dine in and also places to pick up souvenirs for the loved ones to take home. Yorkville in Midtown is your first port of call if you want to splash out on some upscale shopping. If you're after a Canadian gift to take home, Drake General Store supports homegrown artists and designers. The Distillery District east of downtown is an essential stop. It's home to a mix of cafes and restaurants, eclectic shops and art galleries. Toronto is a real cosmopolitan mix with different neighbourhoods offering cuisine from all over the world. Set on a strip of College Street, Buzzy Little Italy's main draw is its classic pizzerias, trattorias and gelato shops. In any city, Chinatown is always a place to visit, and Toronto doesn't disappoint. Ethnic Chinese from Hong Kong, Singapore, Taiwan and Vietnam run a vast selection of shops and fruit markets, and there's dozens of authentic restaurants to tempt your taste buds. If you'd like to use your Toronto key perks, try the Sultan's Tent, a French-Moroccan restaurant with belly dancing every night. After a few margaritas, maybe you'd like to join in the fun and give your hips a shakedown. Alternatively, the Epic at Fairmont Royal York offers fine dining with seasonal and sustainable ingredients. They even grow their own produce on the rooftop garden, 14 stories up. And be sure to try one of their delicious cocktails.
And of course, don't forget to take your Toronto key with you when you head out tonight.
Now, one of the big themes here at Sibos is global payments innovation with over a dozen sessions.
In the 9 months since going live, it's already dramatically improved the customer experience in cross-border payments with greater speed, transparency on fees and end-to-end tracking.
And it's the topic for our first big interview panel discussion. And joining us, we're pleased to welcome Mr. Pong, who's Deputy General Manager, Operation Management Department at ICBC.
Janine Schuin, Treasury Manager for Itron.
Paula Rawls, Head of Market Infrastructures and Industry Initiatives at Deutsche Bank.
And EVP for Product Development and Strategy at the Clearinghouse, Russ Waterhouse. Welcome all.
Hello.
Hey.
Hello.
Thank you.
Good to have
Janine.
you here.
I'll start with you, Janine. Let's start with the need for GPI for corporates. I mean, what are your main challenges with cross-border payments at Itron?
I think our main challenge is just not knowing if our funds reached our beneficiary bank. We'll be notified by our processing bank if there's been a failure, but we never have a positive confirmation that our funds have been received by the beneficiary.
And how do these things impact on your day-to-day business?
I think a really great example is foreign exchange trading. We've contracted to move currency on a certain value date to our trading partners. If for any reason that currency hasn't reached on value date, they contact us immediately. It would be really great if we had a positive confirmation that we could share with them.
And you're hoping to get that soon?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Very soon. Thank you.
Mr. Pong, if I can ask you a question, what were the main reasons your bank adopted GPI?
Yeah, for SBC, I think the main features for Swift GPI, especially for the certainty, accountability, transparencies, are quite attractive for our corporate customers. So I think adopting Swift GPI that can provide value-added service to our corporate customers. Mm-hmm. Moreover, and with Swift GPI, we can also provide more closer cooperation with our corresponding. Last and not at least, using adopting a Swift GPI, we can provide more premium service to our customers, especially as SBC as one of the largest RMB clearing provider. That's why SBC adopting Swift GPI.
And Russ, if I can bring you in now, what are the specific reasons that the clearinghouse is supporting GPI?
Sure. I think the issue of transparency is hugely important. As we think about payments generally, customers are demanding to know where their payments stand. And I think that's actually been a challenge for the industry across different payment platforms. And the absence of transparency actually creates a lot of work for banks, it creates a lot of work for consumers and corporates in terms of identifying where they're at. It also actually creates issues around security, because if you actually have full transparency into a payment, then you have some sense as to the security and the ultimate fulfillment of that payment. Also, if a payment comes through and you get a return on it, and it's actually something you didn't initiate, that might tell you something as well. So I think there's a lot of benefits to these payment systems. I think GPII is clearly something for high value today, which is one system that suffered a lot from the opacity of it. But it's also going to stitch together in other payment systems. So as we bring together real-time payments in the US and also in other jurisdictions, you'll actually be able to take this technology and apply it against those payment systems and really stitch together a user experience across platforms and across use cases.
Well, Paul, if I can ask you, how long did it take your bank to implement GPI?
Actually, from the point we validated what the customer is expecting from us, defining the strategy till the deployment, roughly 6 months. Vital to this deployment was also the support we got from the Swift implementation teams. It was a great team spirit.
And Russ, from your point of view, how will the clearinghouse support GPI? And will there be significant changes required by the member banks to do so?
No, it's actually a fairly straightforward implementation. We've actually taken about 6 months to implement the changes in our system and the message formats. The banks have tested that. We're actually going to go live in about 3 weeks. So we're quite excited about it and look forward to a lot of use. So I think initially, Swift today has maybe 20 or 30 banks using this. 7 of our banks that participate in CHIPS are already testing and expect to go live, and I expect that the full spectrum of banks will ultimately use it.
So you don't see any significant changes required by banks?
Quite straight. Well, it's not none, but it's not hard.
And it's all happening really quickly. Mr. Pong, GPI has been live since the beginning of this year. Is it delivering on its promises?
Yes, Swift GPI is delivering its promise. The Observer, which go live in April, is aiming at provide KPIs for the GPI banks and Observer, and also the GPI successfully migrate to the tracker, which means a lot of transparencies, information like that can be easily to reach, and make your data, which go live in September, quite simplified process of the bank who handling this kind of business. So, in other words, all the dreams comes true eventually.
That's so nice to hear, isn't it? And Mr. Pong's just mentioned the GPI tracker, so a question for you, Paula. The GPI tracker is one of the most innovative and long expected developments as part of the GPI. Yeah. It's been muchly anticipated. Can you tell us why, in your point of view, what will it actually do?
Let me give you a sample, right? So I saw a transaction just the other day, actually initiated in China at 2 a.m. GMT time, right? Going addressed basically to a corporate client in Australia. 2 a.m. GMT is basically 10 p.m. in New York, right? I saw this transaction being delivered and confirmed by the beneficiary bank only 30 minutes later. We never had something like that before. So basically, if Janine would check for a particular transaction, the status of it, she can instantly see it.
Okay.
Wow, it's reassuring.
This tells you all.
Yeah, you know it's been paid, and you get to know almost instantly.
Yeah, that speed is amazing, isn't it?
It is.
Well, Mr. Pong, how will you make the GPI service available to your customers?
Yeah, SBC dedicated to researching and developing this Swift GPI products to our corporate clients. As you know, that SBC has cross-border payment products named SBC Express. That the banks has combined Swift GPI with our intergroup products to provide more convenient, safe, and efficient cross-border product and service to our corporate clients.
I've got a question for both Paul and Russ. What is needed to make GPI the new standard in cross-border payments? And Russ, you haven't spoken for a little while, so how about you?
I think ironically it already is. I think the thing that I find remarkable about GPII is how quickly this has actually come into play. Conversations first started 2 years ago, and here we are implementing. For this community, that's incredible speed. When you're thinking about connecting all of these banks together, the networks, the infrastructures. So to me, that speaks to the value proposition of the product. So I think it's fantastic development.
Paula, you're nodding your head there. What would you like to add?
Can't agree more, and we need to keep the momentum and make sure that we are delivering this experience with any kind of currencies and with any corridors as soon as possible. So reachability is actually the most important point.
Well, not everyone is on board yet. Some are still considering whether to join up. So, Russ, tell them why they should.
I think it's a competitive issue. At the end of the day, the largest payment systems, the largest banks that play globally are actually adopting this standard. So really it's going to be a price of entry. It's something some of your customers are going to expect. So I actually do think market forces will bring ubiquity.
And Janine, from your point of view, is there any advice, this is your golden moment, to give to banks when they're rolling out GPI to their corporates? And you can have a lengthy answer on this one.
Well, actually, very important would be that the solutions are bank agnostic. At Itron, we have 6 bank payment processing banks. And in order to use the tracker, we would love to have a bank agnostic solution so that we can easily deploy for each of our processing banks.
Any other advice would you like to add? Anybody else?
Yeah. Tell others again, we've talked about the benefits of GPI, but really if there are some who are a little bit hesitant and just a bit need that slight push over the edge.
I guess my final piece would be look at your regulators. Because this is something the regulators have agitated for a number of years in terms of more transparency in payments. So this is another example where the industry can actually move forward at its own behest and actually stay ahead of the regulatory mandate, which I always think is a good thing. So for that reason alone, get it done.
Now, one of the beautiful things about coming to Sibos, you get to see lots of different cities, and Toronto is certainly no exception. So we've got a little bit of time just to spend on where you're going tonight, any top tips. Now, you mentioned, Russ, last night that you went up the CN Tower. So can you tell us about that experience?
When it was built, it was the largest structure in the world.
Yeah, 1976?
Yes, I remember it well. I actually just migrated to Toronto when that happened.
Oh, okay.
So it's a great spot. They've got the glass floors, so if you're a little queasy with heights, you can enjoy that. Tonight there's a hockey game, so for anybody who's a Canadian, Red Wings Detroit against the Toronto Maple Leafs, that is absolutely a premier event in hockey. So if you can get a ticket, they'll be expensive, but you can get a ticket, give it a try.
Fantastic, sounds good. Are you going to come along with him? I think that's a good opportunity, isn't it? We're all coming.
Well, you guys, have you taken a crack at the Swift game?
I haven't.
Yeah, so go play it because money goes to charity. 30 euros for every game played, and it's not exactly the same. You don't get the same violence you get on the ring, but but
sticks a little short. That's all good.
Yeah, that's true.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you all for coming.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Now, corporates now have many ways to make and receive payments.
And the number of options will soon increase because of PSD2 regulation changes, open banking, and competition from fintechs.
So where can corporates turn to get clear information and advice that will help them navigate through the complexities of all these payment options?
A new website, smartpayments.com, has been launched, which advises corporates on all their payment matters. And earlier, I was joined by industry editor Erin Oswald and contributor Ed Grant, and I began by asking them to set the scene.
Well, it is complex. The world right now, it's a smaller place because it's more connected, and corporates are trading around the world, and what that means is they're coming in contact with new currencies, new payment rails, new data sovereignty areas, all sorts of new challenges that makes it really quite hard to trade, get cash in, cash out. So a lot of challenges there as they technically connect around the world. So we spend a lot of time at Bottom Line looking at how businesses pay and get paid, and try and help corporates navigate around those expansion challenges.
Is it a question of too many things happening at the same time?
Well, there's a lot happening for sure, and things are getting quicker. And this isn't just the large corporates. I was speaking with a large corporate yesterday, 9,000 bank accounts, over 200 ERP systems, and over 40 currencies. I mean, there could be chaos there if there's not some good advice and pointers on how to make your payments clean and easy, and how they get tracked around the world across different borders.
Mm-hmm. Well, Erin, technology in a big way changing everything, and very quickly, as I just mentioned. I mean, what are your predictions moving forward?
Well, I think the proliferation of cloud-based platforms, a lot of the open API technology, and some initiatives like PSD2 that you mentioned, open banking, all of that is going to result in really more integration for corporates, which is a great thing because they're dealing with a lot of fragmentation today in their internal operations. I think the flip side is there are many more points at which data is going to be changing hands, and you combine that with faster payment settlement, and you really have increased payment fraud risk. So machine learning, predictive analytics, all of those things are going to have to keep ramping up and getting better to keep the industry protected from fraud. And I think the last thing I'd say is that with millennials now coming of age, many of them are in their mid-30s or older. Many of them are coming into leadership roles, either at corporates, corporate treasury, finance, banks, and I think this is a generation who was born with iPhones in their hand, and they're going to be the ones to really help transform technology from where it is today.
You mentioned security risks. We all talk about cybersecurity all the time. We know increasingly with more options are more risks.
Absolutely. I mean, a lot of the security technology in place today was created at least 5 or 10 years ago, and a lot of it is limited in terms of the amount of activity it's monitoring. It relies on audit logs. It may detect something after the fact. And really, the world's just going to be moving too fast to continue with those types of systems. We really need to move toward real-time solutions everywhere.
Well, I got to ask you about your new website, smartpayments.com. I mean,
Yes.
Is that how it came about?
Well, there's a lot of old technology out there, and corporates, and really the back office of any company is really not the first one to get a lot of investment or technology modernization in any company, right? And certainly even the banks that they work with, the consumer side of the bank is tending to get all the innovation and R&D investment. So really our industry is just still using a lot of old systems, and looking ahead at all these changes that are coming, trying to figure out, what's the roadmap for how I get from where I am today to where I need to be, 3, 5, or 10 years down the road. So we thought there was an opportunity. There are a lot of great thought leadership websites out there on payments, but a lot of them are quite broad, and we felt like there was an opportunity to speak specifically to business payments and provide a go-to resource for businesses of any size, SMBs all the way through corporates, as well as the banks and other professionals that serve them, to really have a community around the idea of business payments and talk about what's happening out there, best practices, and where things are going.
I have to admit, I still have a checkbook at home,
Yeah.
which is something you rarely use nowadays. But Ed, what about you guys? What made you interested in smart payments?
What I liked about it was it focuses on the business payments. If you think about it, the point of consumption is actually the corporate. So for all of the banking conversations, the payment itself happens at that point of trade. So you really need to understand the corporate, what their problems are, how they're running their business with the cash in, cash out. And I think it could be troubling if you don't take account of the end user. And that's where I like smart payments getting really close to how businesses pay and get paid, to try and remove that complexity and the kind of pains that they feel.
It sounds like a conversation that a lot of businesses need to have, but are they having it, and are they having it often enough right now?
Yeah, I think most of the time their day-to-day jobs are full of just getting through the next month or quarter and keeping the operations flowing. So I think it is very difficult sometimes to step back and look at where they need to be taking things and how do they really more strategically make improvements in their process so that they can better optimize working capital, manage cash flow, get the payments where they need to be, have more control over where those payments are. So there's definitely more opportunity.
Is this something you think they need to look at in a more long-term view? I mean, it might take them a while to get there, if they start thinking about it now. What's your advice, I guess, for companies out there, perhaps some of the smaller entities as well, how they can do this?
Well, I think smartpayments.com can play a role there because we really are looking for contributors that might come from both corporations themselves. There are corporations that are having great success and re-engineering their process, making improvements, and we want to share those success stories because that helps everyone in the industry move forward. Also, commercial banks or other professionals that serve those companies, they see a wide range of things that are working and things that are not. And so I think smart payments can play a role in helping just create more awareness around different strategies that can be taken, and it saves them a little time researching.
Ed?
Yeah, I was talking to a customer just yesterday, and only 6 months ago, she was never speaking to the fintech community. It was all assumed that payments was going to go through the banking community. Now she has a weekly meeting with these fintechs, so it's really exciting to see that there's new ideas coming through, and let's see where it runs.
So Erin, how can corporates be a part of the conversation on smartpayments.com?
Well, the first thing would be just to visit the website, smartpayments.com, and there's a link at the bottom of the page to subscribe, and that'll deliver articles and insights right to your inbox. In addition to that, if you have something to share, a success story, or just a point of view on things going on in the industry, there's a link at the top of the page to contribute, and that will take you to more information about how to do that.
Okay. So what you have is really a community about smart payments, where people can hear from others as well.
Absolutely.
Okay, guys. Well, thanks so much for coming and sharing with us, Erin.
Thank you.
Ed.
Thank you.
Ed.
And if you'd like to find out more, please take a look at the articles and resources on smartpayments.com.
Now, Swift is committed to reinforcing and safeguarding the security of the wider payments ecosystem, and that's why they have launched their Customer Security Program, or CSP.
And it aims to improve information sharing throughout the community so members can share best practices and also strengthen their systems.
And here with us now to tell us about the CSP is Jim Fries, Chief Compliance Officer, Deutsche Börse Group.
And also Tony Wicks, Head of AML Initiatives at Swift. Well, welcome
Gentlemen,
to you both.
welcome.
How are you both doing?
Very well, thank you.
Very well, thank you.
Good.
Tony, let's start with you. How has the cyber threat evolved in the past 1 to 2 years?
Well, I think obviously 2016 was a watershed year in terms of the Bangladesh incident. And I think what we have seen is fundamentally a shift of focus associated with cyber criminals, where previously they were working at the periphery of the banking system, and potentially this was an attack on the core of that system. The groups are obviously very sophisticated in terms of what they're doing, and obviously incentivized by the potential rewards. And I think it now means that we need to pull together as a community to really respond to this kind of threat.
And Jim, from your point of view, what is the impact of cybercrime on high-value payments?
Well, the one thing that we've seen in the example that Tony already mentioned, it's quite a brazen attack. And these are aspects all financial institutions struggle with: retail fraud and losses that might be passed across different parties. But these are ones that are not really recoverable from, so we need to be a lot more proactive in dealing with them.
That sounds like a bit of a challenge. I mean,
Yes.
So what should we do moving forward? Is regulation the key to that, or is the community coming together? I mean, which is the better way?
You need an aspect of both. So regulation is to some extent reactive and can be too prescriptive, but the regulators need to know both at the individual institution as well as at a systemic level that something's being done. And that's why the community needs part of its effort to be a dialogue educating the regulator, but also looking before what the future risks are.
And Tony, Swift recently launched their Customer Security Program, or CSP. Can you tell us the thinking behind that? Why has it come about?
So the Customer Security Program was launched in the wake of Bangladesh to shore up the defences associated with the industry. And this essentially crosses 3 key or critical areas. The first area is what you as an institution should do in terms of your own controls. And we have launched a Customer Security Controls Framework. And we're asking institutions to attest against their readiness and compliance with that framework by the end of this year. Secondly, we launched what is a security notification service and a Swift ISAC, an information sharing and analysis center that provides details on incidents and actually how those incidents occurred, the information that is required to actually respond to those incidents, and obviously that information sharing is a very important thing. You know, the criminals are sharing information. If we don't do the same, we're not going to keep up with them in terms of that activity. And then the third area is dealing with your counterparts and managing the relationships with your counterparts. And Swift is now starting to launch some fraud prevention, fraud detection solutions associated with that area.
I mean, we've heard so much, haven't we, about collaboration and cooperation. It seems so important, particularly the information sharing.
And you know what? It's funny, but I sometimes think the bad guys have it easier because they don't have any rules or regulations to abide by. They can do whatever they want, whereas the rest of us have to, play by a certain rule book. Is that going to be a real challenge moving forward? Can we keep pace with these guys? Are we always going to be playing catch-up? I mean, how can we...
We're always playing catch-up in a way. But again, that's the way that understanding that there are risks that we cannot rule out, but mitigating those risks. So an aspect of prevention, an aspect of detection and response, but particularly for us working as market infrastructures, hardening the system in reasonable ways.
And how about the common standards? Is that part of the CSP that SWIFT have put in place?
So the controls framework is absolutely about providing a set of common industry standards so that everybody is doing their own bit in terms of that contribution. I think we will see, and we are seeing people stepping up to meet that demand in terms of standards. And obviously, SWIFT is about a connected network of institutions, and that's its strength. And it's important that everybody meets that common set of controls and common standards across the entirety of the SWIFT network.
And I can say within Clearstream, particularly within the group, we've helped work with SWIFT to define those standards, and we're early adopters. It's an imperative to get ahead of this trend.
So we've been working over the last year to ensure that those standards actually make sense for the industry, that they're appropriate in terms of their type, and actually that they can also be applied irrespective of the size or type of institution that you are.
And that's a really good point, isn't it? Because some of the small and the medium-sized banks have had a real challenge, haven't they?
And in fact, some people might be wondering why we have an additional chair on our set. Well, we have one guest who has just made it in, so let's welcome Frank on the set to come and join us.
I feel like we should give you a round of applause, Frank, as you come in.
Thanks for coming by.
Yeah. How are you doing, Frank?
Of course, schedule can be like, right?
Yeah. Actually, just to throw you right in at the deep end then, and I was going to come to you anyway, Frank. I'm glad you made it on time. GPI is another of SWIFT's major innovations in the last year. What role, if any, does GPI have in solving and tackling cybercrime?
Interesting question. I think it'll be a little more of like checks and balances, if you will, because as you send messages to GPI and the downstream beneficiaries, I think it's a way of cross-referencing instructions and advices. So I think that would help in terms of seeing an instruction that doesn't match up to the GPI tracking message. So I think that is one area that it can help out in terms of any type of cyber threat.
Yeah, I think that the transparency that GPI provides so that you can actually see the continuity across the entire message flow is absolutely key. The fact that you can actually then track that progress, so if there is an issue or a problem, you can see where the message is within the system, where it is and sitting in terms of an institution, and then ultimately in terms of GPI there will also be further capabilities to be able to stop and recall messages in the event of either potentially fraud or in the event where there is some other requirement for recall.
Jim, did you want to comment to that?
Just to say that we shouldn't forget, while there are technical solutions in place in some of these standards, that fundamentally it's an aspect that's a business risk, and the business needs to drive this effort. Right. We can't just say, well, I have some IT guy who understands this and he'll find the solution for us.
I was just thinking maybe we could take a leaf out of credit cards. We've had them for many years. Credit card fraud prevention systems have been in place for many years as well. Is this something that we could possibly see introduced for wholesale payments? Frank, what do you think?
What's the old expression? I think it's a horse of a different color in a way. I think that the criticality, urgency of wholesale payments is quite different than credit card check processing. And the reason is that the movement of liquidity around the world, when you're moving big dollars, needs to be done right away. And I think that we're going to have to stop transactions. We have to make sure that there's no fraud involved in them, that it was received in the authentic way that it was intended to by our clients, and yet releasing the payment. And we have tight deadlines. Because of what we've done through the years, we move dollars around this world in seconds. And clients expect that. And the funding that's needed across the globe from those payments is needed. So I think that there's going to have to be this risk and reward balance, of wholesale payments and the criticality of detecting, determining, and making decisioning around whether I can release that payment or not. Different in the credit card space.
Because people want things quicker and fast all the time, don't they? So are they prepared to wait?
Well, this is one of the questions. Who bears that risk when they say speed is important to me and we don't have time to check if there was a problem?
Yep.
Somebody's going to take a loss.
They are. Just want to pull you in again, Jim. How are the Deutsche Börse Group actually responding as a market infrastructure provider to the CSP initiative?
Again, one of the most critical aspects of a market infrastructure is creating that platform, that aspect of standardization, that aspect of leveraging across the market participants, because any weak link in the chain can hurt all of us. So we can really raise that bar by working together, and that's why it's so great to partner with Swift in that regard.
And let's think about the banking industry in general. I mean, how can the community come together to make sure the response to cybercrime is more robust? I mean, collaboration has been mentioned. It sounds lovely, but how are we going to do this in practice when people have been very, very opaque rather than transparent? First of all, you, Frank.
Well, I think we need someone like Swift, and I think sometimes the financial market utilities can help, whether it's the central banks, the Federal Reserve, Clearinghouse, the Target, chaps, in that bankers need to come together and really start to collaborate around incidences they come across, sharing best practices, how they've been able to step up their game in determining and detecting fraud. But I think this is everyone shares responsibility here. The messaging networks, i.e. Swift, the FMUs, like I mentioned, but all of us that are payment participants, if we work collaboratively here, share information, share accounts that are suspect, I think we're going to just be a better wholesale payment environment if we're able to do that.
Tony?
Well, I think that really, it's all about community, and I think what we've seen in the last couple of years is actually that community has stepped up and is actually stepping up to the challenge. And I think in terms of collaboration and cooperation, that is really ultimately that's what's going to make the difference and is actually going to make the banking system a safer system. So I think that's a big change.
Jim, you're nodding?
And having some regulatory support for that is important because, as you said, banks are interested in protecting their data. They don't like to talk about problems that they have, but creating that situation which they can actively share, giving them specific authority to share is important. And what we see, it's not just isolated incidents, it are things that are affecting us across the board. So having a common understanding, a taxonomy, how we can share information that you can quickly operationalize to protect you from who's going to hit you within nanoseconds. That's the next step forward.
But collaborations, we've been talking about that a lot. I mean, talk about information sharing, especially related to cybersecurity, but it's often a bit harder to achieve than actually, it's easier said than done. I mean, is that going to be a key challenge moving forward? As Jim just mentioned, some banks don't want to share so much. I mean, what do we do then, Frank?
Yeah, there's definitely some privacy issues that we have to work through, and we have to also work with our own legal departments. And but I think, again, if we do it as a community where a lot of our legal representatives can come together, we work, and right now when you think of the work that's being done by the Committee on Payment Market Infrastructure, they're going about it the right way. They're doing it globally. They're bringing all the central banks together so that we have a universal solution versus a privacy issue that exists in this country but not in this country, a different approach. So I think that is very, very important. So I think the collaboration there is good.
Because trust is really at stake here, isn't it? Because in the end consumer wants it to be safe, quicker and faster. That's who you're working towards, and sometimes we can forget that. So what legislation needs to be beefed up in a way? What do you need to help
More
you?
regulation? Would that work?
Well,
Tony,
I think
you look disparaged then.
Perhaps Jim had the best response. I think we had an earlier panel session this morning. But I think that the challenge is really in relation to if you're going to go down a regulatory route, is it the right regulation? And it's far better that there is an industry response to deal with and solve the problem than we get burdened again by another set of regulation.
And the one thing we can't forget, that regulation by its very definition only fits within the jurisdiction of the regulator. We're talking about a global risk phenomenon and an internationally active industry. So we're never going to be able to fill that gap on a global basis. Let the regulators talk at principles, let them help guide you what we need, but the industry has to implement that within institutions and share across.
It's a global industry, isn't it? But yet you've got to work against one of those big macro trends, nationalism.
Exactly.
So good luck with that one. Well, gentlemen, yes,
the
please, Frank.
CPMI right now is really open for comments. So they put together 7 principles, 7-point strategy. And this is all the central banks coming together. And now we as the payment participants and the payment providers and the messaging network, we're open for comment here. And I think that's where, if you get feedback around the world of how we can make this work, where it's realistic, if it doesn't de-risk at the end of the day, no one wants all this work to be done when it's not really hitting the bottom line, which is to de-risk.
Well, thank you very much, gentlemen. Frank, we're so glad you made it. It was
Sorry, I was
worth the wait.
late.
No, it's great. We loved you coming in, so thank you very much indeed. And thank you to the other
Thank you very much.
gentlemen as well. Well, that wraps up lunch with Sibos today.
But we'll be back with Sibos today at 3 o'clock. Yep.
Yeah, indeed. Now, application programming interfaces, or APIs, are everywhere.
Well, some people believe they have the potential to create disruptive change in the industry with large social media networks, e-commerce platforms, and new online payment systems.
Others believe the opposite and see APIs as a must-have in order to survive and grow.
To find out more, stay tuned to Sibos TV for the session Banking APIs, Disruptive Threat or Innovative Opportunity.
That's all for now. See you at 3 for Sibos Today.
We'll
see you later.